One of the reasons why this question is very important is because the answer to this question will determine how we answer all of life's existential questions. There are 4 existential questions that everybody has to answer, except you are the most absent-minded, unaware, unintentional person that is just like living like a brute, and which I trust that nobody here is, because for you to be here is because you are thinking about your life. So except you're like an absent-minded person that's just living like a brute, like for lack of a better word, I don't mean to say it pejoratively, but for lack of a better word, except you're just living like an animal, just eating to sleep and wake up, reprocreate, sleep, wake up, procreate, except you're living like that. If you're a human being engaging your mind, there are 4 important questions that you would have to ask yourself. And the question, these are the 4 questions are: question of your origin. Where are you from? You have to have asked yourself at some point, if you are paying attention about your life, where am I from? From what cloth was I cut from? Or from what cloth was I cut? How am I here? Right? So where am I from? The second question is, why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? What is the meaning of my life? Like, what's the meaning of my life? What is the purpose of my life? You have to ask yourself that question at some point. The third question you have to ask yourself is, how should I live my life? What is right and what is wrong? What is good and what is evil? So how should I live my life? And fourthly, the last question you have to ask yourself at some point is, what will happen to me when I die? How will I end? What's my destiny? How am I going to end? How is my life going to end? So if you are not living like an animal and you're living like a rational person, you have to have asked yourself those questions at some point. And so that is the reason why this question is extremely important. Who is in control? Another way that I can ask the question is, who determines the outcomes of our lives? Who determines our existence and our reality? Who is in control? Another way to ask the question is, who is truly free, us or God? So there are different ways to phrase the question, but basically what this question is concerned with is things that are happening in this world. Who is causing them to happen? That is what the question is about. And I'm sure that if you have been thinking about it, you know that this question is very important. It's a question that is burning in your mind. The way Nigeria is, who caused it? Who really caused it? The way things are, where there are some terrible, terrible things that happen, who caused it? Whose fault is it? Sometimes when some really good things, in quotes, or pleasurable things happen, who ultimately caused these things? So the question is, who is in control? And I would like to offer you, generally, I'm going to do a quick survey of how these questions has been answered philosophically and religiously by people from the beginning of time. And so we have 4 categories. And I'll go with the first one. Next slide, please. I'll go with the first one. The first one is the Epicurean way of thinking. Now, please don't be offended if you are a Pan-African or something, that I'm using Greek philosophers. But the truth is that as far as documentation of philosophical history is concerned, the Greeks are the ones that did it best. And they're the ones that really put down the thoughts in a way that people can read after. So I'll start with the Epicurean way of thinking. And the Epicurean way of thinking can be seen with contemporary today atheists and deists. And basically what it says is that there is no God. And so because there is no God, or even if a God exists, or even if gods exist, they are somewhere very far and they don't care what is happening. So everything that is happening in this world is man that is doing it. And so that's why if you look at my slide, I put a continuum there, and this is a slide that a continuum of the entity that is in control between God and man. And I'm going to be going through the major thoughts. And so we'll be seeing on the scale where each philosophy puts the control on, where each philosophy how each philosophy answers the question. So you can come from the Epicurean side, and that is the idea that there is no God, or even if God exist. The God doesn't matter to us. It does not affect our life in any reasonable way. They are just, the person or those things are just there. And we are the ones in control of everything that is happening. And so because man is in control on the sliding scale, it means that when man wants to pursue things, let me go like this. Based on the Epicurean thought, based on this idea that God does not exist or God is not concerned with us, and man is the one that is in control, the idea that if you see anything in this world happening, it is man that is causing it. Everything is because of man. Everything is man that is causing it. If you try to answer those 4 questions based on this way of thinking, these are the kind of answers that you will get. First of all, where do we come from? So based on this, since God does not exist, we are not created with any intention. Man comes from matter that just exists naturally and spontaneously, either by chance or some luck or without any intention or purpose. We just came out into existence. That's where we are from. When you want to answer the second question of why are we here, there is no answer. We are here by mistake. We are here by chance. Our lives have no purpose. Our life has no meaning. We don't have any direction in life except the one that we make. But we are not giving purpose. We make up our purpose, right? And that flows also into the third question. How should we live our lives? What is right and what is wrong? Following from that, the answer to the question for the Epicureans was, we should live our lives. Since there's no purpose and there's no God and there's no meaning, we are going to create our own meaning. And how we will create our meaning is by maximizing pleasure and reducing pain. So it's actually more about reducing pain, because there are some heights of pleasure and hedonism that you will chase that will lead to a lot of pain. So basically, the way they answer the question is that you should live your life to reduce the amount of pain that you suffer and for the most number of people possible. So when you ask an Epicurean or someone of these thoughts, someone that thinks like this, whether they take this tag or not, when they are talking, you can put them into a category. When you ask someone that thinks like this, that what is good, what should we do with our life, the person will say, try and reduce the amount of suffering that yourself and other people are suffering. So for them, a bad person is a person that is increasing our suffering, and a good person is a person that is minimizing our suffering. And therefore, the last question, what is our destiny? How do we end? What is the end of our lives? They would answer the question by saying that, listen, we're not going anywhere. We're just going to disappear. We're going. There's nothing about it. There's nothing special. So the little time that you have here, your life is like a candle. Make sure you leave it to reduce pain as much as you can. And after that, you are gone. Of course, if we reflect on this way of thinking, if we reflect on this kind of answer, for many people, it will be untenable. There are some people that can live like this, but for thinking people, it's a life that we cannot live. Because, first of all, the idea that your life does not have a purpose and you make up your own purpose is a big problem. If our point in life is to reduce the amount of pain that you endure, the problem is that, what if the thing that is causing you pleasure is causing me pain? And what if the thing that is causing me pleasure is causing you pain? Whose own do we follow? You said we should live our life to maximize pain. What if people happy is paining me? If I want to minimize my pain, there's going to be what? Problem. If we now say, our life, and so because of that, what will happen is that we're going to find ourselves in a place where everybody does what is right in their own eyes. Everybody will follow their own definition of what it means to reduce pain, isn't it? And so at the end of the day, we're going to have a lot of conflict and differences of opinion on what it means to reduce pain. And when we get to that point, what will happen is that might is right. The most powerful person will win. I hate to use a graphic example, but it usually helps, because intuitively, this is one of the things that God has given all human beings, that you really need to be injured for you not to get it. There's this series I used to watch. If you watch it, it will make you believe in human depravity. Law and Order SVU. I like that. They are getting it. Now, if you meet someone that is attracted to children, people that we call pedophiles, they are in pain. If you see the way they describe them in those movies, they are in pain when they don't get to rape children. They will be driving cars, fantasizing and looking at children in the streets. If that person wants to minimize his pain, whose child should he use? You know this is a serious problem. So, we are in control, there's no God. That is the first one. There is a softer version of this, next slide, which is Epicurean-ish. The peripatetics, which are people from Aristotle's school of thinking, they taught this a lot. We also see it in religions or from some form of religions that believe in open theism. And we see this, I call it Epicurean-ish for a reason, because in this system of thinking, which is open theism or peripatetic, the idea is that there is a God. And so it is a religious and softer form of Epicureanism. That there is a God, but the God knows all things. The God or the gods, they know all things. They are omniscient. They even have things that they want, things that they prefer to happen. But they have ceded control to human beings. Are we together? But they have ceded control to human beings so that human beings are the ones that really make things happen. So the gods, they know everything that will happen. And the reason why they know everything that will happen is because human beings will do what they want to do, and the gods will just follow the logical implication and know what the human beings will do. But the actual choice, the actual intentionality of making things happen is the human beings that do it. Are we together? So God is a knower and a carer of creation, but man is the governor. So God knows and God cares, but man is the governor. Are we together? Furthermore, they would say that God cannot override what man is doing. So when man is doing what he wants, God will not stop man from doing what he wants. So everything that happens is what man wants, to the extent that even if the God or the gods will enter into human affairs, man must give God or the gods permission to enter into human affairs. So ultimately, the man is the one determining what will happen, while God is knowing and caring and watching from afar. So man is the one that is truly free, not God. God is limited, but man is free to act. Or another way to say it is that man's freedom limits God's freedom. So that the only place where you see God acting directly in human affairs is when man has given God leave to be involved. All right? And so, if we're going to answer the 4 cardinal existential questions based on this open theism or Epicureanish way of thinking, is where do we come from? Because they believe in God, they believe that man was created with an intention, and God created man with immortal souls and all that. Why are we here? We are here with a purpose, because God has a plan, or the gods have a plan and an intention for why they created us. How should we live our lives? Even though God has created us with an intention, that intention will not be fulfilled. God cannot achieve that intention. We are the ones that have to work out that intention. So that is the reason why it is Epicureanish, because all it does is just, instead of like the pure Epicureans do, instead of completely ignoring God, it affirms God, but still puts God in his place. So that how do we live our lives? We live our lives trying to achieve the purpose that God has for us, but because God cannot do this thing for us, We are the ones that will do it. So we live our lives pursuing, trying to achieve that purpose that God or the gods have said is good for us. And how do we end? We're going to end in eternal judgment based on what we have done in this world. If we are to reflect on this open theism, you will find that religions that teach this, and there are some misapprehensions of even Christianity that tend to think like this. And if you look at the scale, it is still on man's side. It is still on man's side, even though there's a little push from the God side of the scale. But it's still basically on man's side. If we look at it, you'll find that it's a very performance-based religion. You will find that this religion, these kinds of religion or these ways of thinking will lead you into a life whereby everything you do in your life is based on what you did, on how hard you worked. It will have nothing to do with exactly what God did, so to speak. Or even if God did something, God did it because of your performance. What it will lead to is that when people have outcomes in their lives, they will look at the outcomes in their lives as the result of their hard work. And because of that, when they see people who are not having those outcomes or those results, they look at them as people that are not working hard enough. All right? What now flows naturally out of that, which I know this time is too short, so we can't really walk through all these things down in detail. Another question that it will now beg, if you are thinking through it very well, is to ask yourself questions like, in this kind of religion, what would be the essence of prayer? What would be the essence of prayer, right? If it is about us doing stuff, why are we praying? It means that in these kinds of religions, prayer will be about getting God to do stuff. It will not be so much about fellowship. In this kind of religion, there will be a lot of people that will put a lot of trust in men, because if God is going to intervene because you permitted him, if the other guys around you don't permit him, whose permission will win? Did you get that? If one person is permitting God, but every other person here is not permitting God, what happens? In this kind of religion, why don't we put our faith in people? Since people are the ones that make things happen, if I need something in my life, why don't I go to people first? And if people cannot work out, then God should be my backup. It begs all these questions. And of course, as with all performance-based religions, it leads to a situation where there cannot be mercy, where there cannot be love, where there cannot be true empathy. Because it leads to a kind of situation where you can be in a temple and be praying and be looking at someone beside you who is not doing as well as you, and you would say, I thank God I'm not like this guy because I'm better, I'm working harder, and I'm better because of how hard I am working. It should not be possible to love that kind of person, because you have to see the person like you. In such a situation, people who are less than you will only get pity and disgust, not true love. Because true love requires for you to see yourself in the same shoes as the person and give yourself fully for them. If you truly believe that someone is suffering because of it is their fault, if you truly believe that this man is in this problem because he's not working hard enough, why should you sacrifice yourself for him? There's no reason. All he needs to do is step up and work harder, like I did. Nobody did it for me. Why should I do it for you? And so that is the reason why the theological term for it is legalism. Legalistic people don't know how to love. That is the conclusion of this kind of thinking. And there are many other things, but because of lack of time. There is a fourth way of thinking where the scale begins to go on the Godward side. And that's why we have the understanding of the Stoics. The Stoics were started in Greece, but the Romans also believed it a lot. So it's a Greco-Roman philosophy, very strong. But it's a way of thinking that we can even still see among people today, even among atheists. And it is the idea that Everything that will happen has been fated. Fate. Fate is the word. Fate is the key word. Everything that will happen has been fated in an unbroken chain of causality. So from the beginning of the universe to the end, there is a set way and series of events that will happen that have been fated. So you are literally just like a leaf on the river, going wherever the river is taking you. And so you have no control. The only control that you have is over your emotions, which, if I want to argue philosophically, I would argue if your emotions are the product of materialistic cause and effect in your brain, then even your emotions, you don't have control over them. But that's philosophy for another day. Let's take it and accept it as they said it. Let's not go too deep into that. So the only thing that you have control over is your emotions. So fate, for the Stoics, even the gods, their outcome was fated. So that's why if you watch a lot of Greek movies or animations and all that, you will see that even the gods have a thread of fate that they are following. You understand? So even the gods themselves, how their life will end has been fated. If we want to use this way of thinking to answer the fundamental question of our lives, where do we come from? We come from, for many Stoics, for most of the Stoics back then, they didn't believe in any God and all that. They believed that matter was just existent by itself. And so we just came from the matter. So we came from meaningless matter by chance. So that's where we come from. We come from nature. Why are we here? We are not given any purpose. Nobody gave us any purpose because we came from that matter or nature by itself. But how do we live our lives? This is where the Stoics are different from the Epicureans. For the Stoics, how you live your life is to maximize virtue. That means when things happen to you, instead of reacting angrily or being sad or doing anyhow and misbehaving or being neurotic, for the Stoics, no matter what happens to you, take it. So that is the reason why it became an adjective that they'll say men are more stoic, so to speak. So for the Stoics, don't be emotional. When things happen, take it like a man, receive it. If your country is being destroyed and marauded by barbarians, take it. And then if good things happen to you, don't become too happy that you will now be clubbing and be enjoying yourself and be happy. No. Even when that one comes too, you stay, boom. You don't. So, not too much emotion. So, the good is for you to be virtuous. That means be hardworking, be wise, be self-controlled, and stuff like that. For the Stoics, that's how you should live your lives. And then where will we end? There's no eternal judgment. There's no anything. Just make sure that you live your life as virtuously as possible. And when you die and you go, and bye-bye to you. And if we think about this just for a moment, well, maybe because many of the Stoics back then, I won't say all, so I will not misrepresent them, but many of the popular Stoics that we know were elites and rich men. It's easy to say when you are rich. When you are powerful and life is soft, like you say, whatever happens to you, take it. If you collect like 300 rejection mails in 1 month. But more importantly, deep down, we know it does not make sense. First of all, we know that what we do matters. We know that when we do things, the semester I passed, the one where I played, you understand? So this idea of things are just happening, it does not make sense deep down. But more, and then finally is that this kind of life is untenable. How can I just accept my fate? If I'm in a very terrible situation, I should just accept it and not, you understand, it does not make sense. And lastly, if there's no eternal judgment and all that, why should I live my life trying to maximize virtue? What if virtue for me is to take care of my family no matter the cost? What if virtue for me is to provide for my wife even at the expense of your life? That is virtue. What if virtue for me is to go to another country and plunder it? How will you tell me that my understanding of virtue is wrong? Especially because there's nobody greater than us to judge whose virtue is correct and whose own is wrong. The Stoics were even much deeper. They even believe that you should not marry because of love, you should marry because of stake and all those things. But let's not go into all that. Are we together? So for this, faith is completely in control. There is a fourth one that is popular in the world, which is like a softer version of, not softer, but it's also like this. It is Stoic-ish. I call it Stoic-ish. And you find it in religions like Islam and some misapprehensions of Christianity like hyper-Calvinism, which is that instead of faith is basically God, and every detail of your life, every word that is written in your life has been written and done, so you don't even have agency. Right? In this, everything has been written out in detail. Your life has been written out in detail, so even your ability to choose is a mirage. You are not really choosing. What you are doing, what you thought was a choice, is something that someone made you to do. So your choices are not real. And so you can, whatever comes to your mind, you can even try to do it and all that. But basically, at the end of the day, what you are doing is still something that God wrote for you. And so, how does this answer the first questions of our lives? First of all, where do we come from? We come from God. God created us. We're creatures under this. Why are we here? We're here to fulfill the purpose that we were made for, and that is that God made us for. And how should we live our lives? We should live our lives doing what God has said, even though if we do otherwise, they made us to what? Do it. If we do so, they made us to what? And the other people that are not doing so, they made them to do it. So how you should live your life is to live your life according to the precepts of the religion, but knowing that whatever you are doing, in fact, as I'm talking to you now, atikosile, you understand that? That this is what I will say. And where will we end? We're going to end in judgment, but it does not make sense. Because if everything that I am doing, I was made to do it, and I am not responsible for my actions, I am not morally responsible for my actions, what kind of judgment is that? What kind of justice is that? What is the point? Why can't I just live my life the way I want and say they made me? Let me say a couple of things before I go into what the apostles of Jesus and the prophets of the Bible and the apostles of Jesus, what they actually said is reality, and which makes sense to our reason. It makes sense to our reason, but more importantly, this is what was revealed by the creator of the universe through the mouth of his messengers. But some reflections first. All the previous formula have something in common. They put God and man in the same category of causation, so that whatever happens in the world is either or. They all put man and God in the same category. And so because of that, whenever you see something happen, they have to attribute to God or to man, and any attribution they take from man, they will add to God. So it's a kind of zero-sum game. But one of them must be responsible. So if you look at all the previous ones, if you ask them who is in control, they will either answer 100% God, 100% man, 100% faith. The peripatetics will say 90% man and 10% God, or 80% man and 20% God. At the end of the day, they are using those two entities as alternatives to each other. But the creator of the universe revealed what actually happens and who is in control in the true way, which is worthy of his person, which is that it is superior and above what men can think. When men try to calculate, they wake up into reality and they see all the things happening around them. Based on the brokenness of the human mind and the limitation by sin and our broken intellect, when they want to make attributions, their best philosophy will come up with one of those four because of the limitation. But because God is far higher than our ways, and his ways are far above us, God tells us what is actually happening, which is above our own calculus. And what he reveals is that God and man are not in the same category of position, that the two of them are 100% the result, they're 100% the cause of what happens, with God being the first cause of all things. And I will explain. It means that, first of all, God is the ground and of all existence. God is the first cause. So all things are happening by his decree and by his ordainment. And then he ordains second causes and means through which things will happen. And the causes that he himself is still involved with his creation. And the second causes, like man, are involved in their creation. And none of them are taken out of each other. None of them are reducing each other's role. Both of them are working, and the cause is being achieved, so that man is fully responsible. And whenever any man acts, you can hold him and say, you made a choice. You were not forced. You made a choice to do this. And so if what you did is good, you'll be rewarded. And what you did is evil, you will be judged, so that the justice is accurate. And at the same time, God is not far from his creatures. He's involved with his creatures, so that nothing can happen that he did not ordain, and he has not relinquished it, so that he just knows what will happen, but is involved in what is happening. That is what happens, and it's a proper mystery and paradox that we try to grapple with. This mystery is demonstrated, first of all, in certain truth statements, but which is best understood in narratives. So, for example, this is what I mean. For example, if you look at Isaiah chapter 46, from verse 8 to 11, the prophet of God Isaiah is speaking, and he says that God says, my counsel will stand, and I will do my purpose. In many places, the prophet David, for example, will say in Psalm 115 and in Psalm 136, and say God sits in heaven and does as he pleases. When Jesus came in the flesh, he said, not even a leaf can fall from a tree without he says so, letting you know that God is involved in every detail of his creation. He didn't create his creation and leave it. He's involved in his creation. You know, in other places, Paul will say that is the one, Ephesians chapter 1 verse 11, that is the one that works all things in accordance to the counsel of his will. So in many places, we'll see true statements by God in the flesh, by the prophets of the Old Testament, by the apostles of the New Testament, telling us that God is actively involved in every detail of his creation. At the same time, these revelations will tell us that God does not do evil. For example, in Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 4 to 5, the people of Israel were sacrificing their children and burning their children as a burnt sacrifice to these gods of the Canaanites. And the way God will describe it, he will say, I did not command it, neither did it enter my mind. Because God does not do evil. So he's involved in all his creation, and yet he does not do evil. It is man that does evil. In Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 31, the same thing God repeated himself. In the New Testament, the way the apostles put it is like, for example, in James chapter 1, from verse 13 to 15, it says that God does not tempt people with evil because he himself is not tempted with evil. Because from the God of the Bible's perspective, evil is not even a thing. So that is why God did not create evil. Everything he created was good. Even Satan was created good, and then he fell. So in the Bible, evil is like a privation, is a loss. It is what darkness is to light. Are we together? Darkness is not a thing. It is when you put off the light that darkness appears. In the same way, God did not create evil, but we see evil in the world when human beings or angels or any of these spirits fail to do what is right. So God does not do evil. And so that's why he does not tempt with evil. I'm using the word evil here to mean evil properly. There's a sense in which people use evil to mean suffering. Like when there's calamity coming on a country as judgment. That can also be called evil in a sense, but I'm using evil in its proper sense. That calamity that comes as judgment is not evil, strictly speaking, as we will see going forward. So we see that God is sovereign, and not just sovereign, he's involved with every detail of creation, works all things, every leaf is in his knowledge, every hair on your head right now is counted, he knows everyone. And when you go to the barber this week or next week or in the next 6 months, depending on how your hair grows, every strand of hair that falls, God knows the number because he's involved. And yet he does not do evil. And yet he tells us that man is responsible. So that from the beginning in Genesis chapter 3, he told man not to do something. He warned man against it, and man did it. In chapter 2, God told Cain that this thing that you want to do, sin is creeping to devour you. Don't give in to it. Letting us know that man was responsible for his evil. And on and on and on through the entire Bible. In Ezekiel tells us that the soul that sins will die. In Matthew, in different parables and different ways, Jesus will tell us that if men do this and if they do that, they will receive their judgment. The apostles will tell us in Romans chapter 2 that every man is going to receive according to what they have done in the flesh. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 10, 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 10, it says God is coming at the end. He's going to give every man a reward according to what they have done. So God is sovereign. God is involved in every detail. God does not do evil, and yet man is responsible. Both are true. None taken from each other. And this is the truth of who is in control. Please, let's go back to the last slide again. Last slide. And we have certain narratives in the Bible that have helped us to really see this, such that God is the ground of all existence, is the first cause, and the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of man are two parallel lines that can only meet in the eternal nature of God. None is taken from the other. Every alternative to this understanding only leads to making God smaller. And this is the reason why every understanding of who is in control that is different from what the Bible says ultimately leads to blasphemy. Because it leads to making God smaller. It leads to insulting God. It leads to making God less than who he is and makes him less worthy of worship. If God does not exist, you are not giving the worship due to him, and whatever judgment comes from that is due. If God is banished from his creation and you have to give him permission for him to act in his own creation, it is an insult to the great one, making him a mindless, absentee landlord. That is the reason why men in such frames can boast, because they are the ones doing it. If you say that God has written our life like code, he is less worthy of worship because he's not, God is love. Such a God cannot be love. A God that makes you do evil and judges you for it is not love, it's blasphemy. Every other understanding of providence is tantamount to blasphemy. And so that is the reason why in the Bible, we have all these narratives that help us to see it clearly, for us to understand it when the philosophy is getting too technical. A good example is the story of Joseph and his brothers in Genesis chapter 45. In verse 4 to 8, Joseph said something very interesting because of time. He said to his brothers, "Come near me, I pray you." Let's go to verse 5. You guys know this. Okay, for those who are not Christians here, the story is very popular, but if you're not a Christian, let me just summarize it quickly. Joseph is this guy. He's the second to the last son of a man called Jacob. When he was young, his father liked him above all his brothers. So because of that, his father gave him special treatment and the special treatment, he was also a very boisterous person that was looking down on his brothers. So one day, his father sent him to go and check on his brothers where they were grazing sheep because they were nomadic type people. And so he went there, and when they saw him from afar, his brothers, because they were angry with him, they said they were going to kill him. So the firstborn intervened and said, "No, let's not kill him." So they sold him into slavery instead. And in slavery, he first started as a slave of a man called Potiphar. But Potiphar's wife lied against him. And, Women has come sometimes, men also scam, but you get what I'm saying. And then he went into prison because of that. And then he answered everybody's dreams. And then after some time, they remembered him in the palace. And then he answered the king's dream. And then because of that, he became prime minister. So he went from slavery to prison to prime ministership. And so his brothers that caused all that, after some years, because of a famine, they met him, but they didn't recognize him. So after he had dealt with them and tortured them a little bit, he finally told them who he was because they didn't recognize him. And this is what he said to them after everything had happened. He says, now therefore do not be grieved or angry with yourselves that you sold me hither, for God did send me before you to preserve life. Now, if you don't have the context, you would not understand something. Like 200 years before this time, God had told their grandfather or their great-grandfather that a time would come when his descendants will go into Egypt, and after some time, he will save them again. So God had a plan, and every detail he was working it. But this is what happened. These guys thought that they were just trying to kill their brother, and it was not God that made them to do it. They did it of their own volition, and it ended up tying into the eternal plan that God had. And so when Joseph will remark on it, he said, it was God that sent me. Who sent him into prison? Who sent him into slavery, humanly speaking? Was it not the brothers? But Joseph was here saying it was God that sent me. Look at verse 7. Verse 6. What's verse 6? God sent me before you. And at the end of verse 7, just go to verse 7. It says, and God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Verse 8. I think verse 8 is the last one. So now it is not you. He said it over and over. But God has sent me and made me a Pharaoh, Lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout the land. So that as his brothers were acting, they were acting freely. And yet God was sovereign all through, bringing out his own his own intentions. If a Stoic had seen this story, he would have said, Joseph, accept your fate. If it was an Epicurean or an open face, they will say, it was we that did it. But when the God of the Bible says, he says, I'm the one that did it as you were doing it. There's another interesting story in Isaiah chapter 10. That one is a very long read. I'll just summarize it for you. You are the people of Israel. The descendants of these guys, after a couple of centuries, they started doing a lot of evil things. Like I said earlier, they were sacrificing their children to gods. They were doing all kinds of nasty things. I don't want to go into the details. And so, just as God used them to judge the Canaanites, God sent the Assyrians to judge them. But this is the interesting thing. If you read Isaiah chapter 10, if you read from verse 5 to 19, the story is very interesting because what happens is that God starts by saying and owning the responsibility of the Assyrians. He starts by saying, the Assyrians are my weapon. I chose them. I am using them. I am using them to judge you. God claims them. And then, after some verses, goes on to say, but these Assyrians, I will judge them. Because when they were coming with the intention of doing evil. And for the evil that they came to do, I will judge them. So this is what happens. If you read it from normal history, you will just hear that a certain king in the New Assyrian Empire woke up and said, it's time for me to start conquering. So he came by conquering all the Babylonians and Medes and Persians around him, then went on and started conquering lands. And so, genuinely, the Assyrians just wanted to conquer the whole world. And it was not God that made them do the evil. And these Assyrians were nasty. They were the kind of nasty that when they enter a country, if they see pregnant women, they will slash their stomach open and bring out the baby and do all kinds of nasty things like that. Assyrians were wicked, nasty people. God did not put it in their mind. And they were going to do their thing. And yet God used them to judge the Israelites because he had promised the Israelites like 1,000 years before that if you start doing this thing, the same thing that happened to these Canaanites will happen to you too. So the Assyrians were completely responsible. So when God was judging them for their evil, he judged them for the evil that they did. And yet he's the one that worked out the sovereign plan of judging the Israelites for the things that they did. That is not human understanding. That is a God that is greater than all creatures. The last one that I'll just use is from Acts chapter 2. Here is Peter. In case, it says Old Testament and all that. I could give a couple of examples from the Old Testament, but here's a very short one in the New Testament. In Acts chapter 2, verse 22 to 25, Jesus had died and he had risen. And on the day of Pentecost, God sent this Holy Spirit down to people. And so people were talking to Peter, and Peter was preaching to them. And this is what Peter said to them. Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs which God did him in the midst of you, as you yourselves know, verse 23, him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God. So the foreknowledge of God here is clear. That is not just that he knows what they will do. Peter explains to us that the foreknowledge of God is his determinate counsel. So that means that God was planning it, and yet ye have taken him by wicked hands and crucified and slain him. So when the Pharisees were cooking, God was not making them do evil. When Judas Iscariot was doing it, Satan was tempting Judas Iscariot. It was not God that made Judas Iscariot to do it. All those guys were doing their evil. God does not tempt people. So he didn't tempt them to do the evil. They were doing their thing, but guess what? Everything was his determinate counsel. You mean of determinate counsel and foreknowledge. So that all the Pharisees that were involved and all the evildoers that were involved, they would have got their judgments. None of them would be able to say, God made me do it. You did it. And yet, what you are doing is what God had been planning from the beginning of the earth. Because we're talking about a God that exists in dimensions that is far above ours. His ways are not our ways. If we're to ask God in his endless creativity, how is he able to work all things according to the counsel of his will? And yet human beings are morally free. In our plane of existence, it will be a proper paradox. But we see paradoxes all the time, even in science, because we must accept our limitations and see what is true. This paradox defines and is the best explanation of reality. All of us know in our hearts that what we do matters. And yet, all of us know that we are not in control of everything. These two things are true. The human thing is to want to go to one side or the other. But what I'm telling you today, and I hope you will take, is what God actually says is happening. That we don't try to take from God to give to ourselves. And we don't try to take from man what God has given man. Let me say it again. We must not take from God to give to ourselves, to make it easy for ourselves to understand. And we must not take from man what God has given man. If God says he's sovereign over every detail, then he is. And if God says men are responsible, we know he is. We must not take men, rob men of their responsibility and their agency. And so this truth, except for those who are insistent on atheism, for everyone that is a theist, for everyone who believes that there is a God, this truth is the truth of our reality, and it is the only truth that we can truly live consistently with. This is the only truth that we can consistently live our lives with without being incoherent. This is the only worldview where we can pray, knowing that God is sovereign, and we can have confidence that man cannot stop God. Because the whole essence of prayer is that we are trusting that man cannot stop God. If we are peripatetics or open theists, as we are praying to God, we'll be afraid that there's a man somewhere that is not giving God permission. This is the only way we can truly pray, knowing that God cannot be stopped by men, and at the same time live our lives with full responsibility for what we are doing. This is the only way. Every other way cannot work. Every other way will lead us to saying, I'm not responsible, let me just live my life. Another way will say, prayer to God to do things is supplementary. And even when we are praying, we are not sure, because men can overturn what he's doing. The only way we can live in comfort, knowing, because I should say this, there's some comfort in the Stoic way of thinking. And the comfort is that whatever will be, que sera, sera. So just live your life, wake up and all that. But that is not a good comfort, because we're given volition. And the gift of agency comes with its burden. God did not intend for us to live a life without feeling the burden of our responsibility. So this is the only way that we can live consistently, and it explains everything about our existence. So, who is in control? God is in control, being the first God, being the first cause, and man is fully responsible for his actions. Thank you very much. As we go.